Dyson has just won an impressive victory in court against the EU Commission, with the upshot that EU energy labels for vacuum cleaners are very likely to change as of 2019. This is a really fascinating story of corruption and deception that has screwed over the customer for years. Dyson's victory in court has exposed a scandal, and in this video I'll talk through the public facts about how consumers have been misled and influenced to buy poorer technology. One of the early videos on my channel, with the first link in the description, covers what the EU energy and performance labels are and the run-up to this important court case, and I'd recommend you go and watch it to set the background. In May 2013, the EU Commission required all vacuum cleaners to come with performance rating labels, as explained in the second link in the description. They showed dust emissions and noise levels, and claim to show how well they apparently perform across carpets and hard floors. Dyson took real issue with this labelling for many very good reasons. Testing only needs to be conducted on an empty vacuum cleaner that's in new and pristine condition and not dust loaded. This is unlike any other rated product which is tested when full. As such, it's not representative of real-world use, especially for machines which rely on bags or filters as their primary method of dirt separation. Manufacturers can cheat and game the system, and they did. Many tested when the bag was empty and filters were clean when it's easy to get good performance. Worse, some manufacturers even use technology to increase motor power automatically when the machine fills with dust to try and brute force compensate for the clogging associated with poor designs. This meant an A-rated machine could drop to a G rating after first use, contrary to the label ranking the public receives. This behaviour was counter to the spirit of the labels and misled customers. Perhaps worst of all, manufacturers could apparently self-certify their scores on the labels without the need for any independent testing to a common set of formal industry standards. This led to significant margins of error, and so the labels never represented true comparability between different cleaners. Apples and oranges, and very misleading. Even others have noticed. Motor input power was, and sometimes still is, wrongly used to judge which vacuum cleaner was best. Good modern designs have shown there's absolutely no relationship between motor power and cleaning performance. Even consumer review businesses such as Which agree, as shown in the third link in the description, and have found no such relationship. And this is despite that Which fall victim to the same problem as the EU labels and don't test to formal industry standards that are universally recognised as the golden comparative measure. I've produced a really nice video in the fourth link in the description explaining where vacuum performance really comes from, which you should watch. Prior to the flawed labels being formally introduced, Dyson took the EU Commission to the EU General Court for the reasons just discussed. Because testing isn't done with a dust-loaded, partly full bin, which represents how vacuums are used, any cleaner which relies on bags and filters to remove dust, and thus gradually clogs over time, can cheat the labelling. Dyson claimed this unfairly discriminated against their Cyclone technology, which can achieve constant high performance, because other manufacturers could unfairly exploit that loophole. They lost their case, however, in 2015 because the court claimed that there was currently no test for a dust-loaded machine that was reliable or reproducible. No other reasons were given by the court that accounted for the rest of the problems presented with the labels I discussed earlier. Dyson launched an appeal to the higher European Court of Justice in 2016 and successfully won it in May 2017. The European Court of Justice forced the EU General Court to reconsider the case, and according to the fifth link in the description, claimed the EU General Court had distorted the facts, ignored its own law, ignored Dyson's evidence, and failed to give reasons for its original verdict. That's just astounding. Just as with the recent victory in the case against Shark's disgusting and misleading advertising lies, which I've covered in the sixth link in the description, this was another example of Dyson being unfairly dismissed in initial court hearings and being made to jump through further costly hoops to get justice. Back in the EU General Court, and with a mandate to do a proper job, after much deliberation and appropriate consideration of the evidence, in November 2018, the court upheld Dyson's claim that the EU Commission's labelling system misled consumers and discriminated against Dyson's technology. This is a significant victory for Dyson, who've battled for truth and justice for consumers, because they've now successfully had a piece of primary EU law annulled, which is a very rare achievement. The upshot now, assuming there isn't an appeal, is that in early 2019, the EU labels will be abolished. However, the court ruling also stated that the EU Commission must fill the void left by the annulled labels. Given the labels are, in principle, a noble and positive thing, and the Commission is keen to keep them, this will likely mean they'll be modified to take into account the flaws of the old one. As imposed by the court, the solution must now reflect the real-world performance of vacuum cleaners, particularly when they're full of dust. There'll be no more cheating by manufacturers of bagged technology, and we'll now get to see just how well they really perform on the labels. However, this isn't easy. The court recognised in its first otherwise flawed ruling that there's no official test for dust-loaded machines. Even the industry standards don't account for it. This is the reason why Dyson advertised they test beyond the industry standards, meaning they conduct all the required tests in the standard, but conduct additional tests, for example, repeating when the bin is full. It's possible that the industry test standards will now need another revision to include such a test to comply with the requirements of the label's replacement. Furthermore, as is recognised even by Which, as long as manufacturers can self-certify their performance labels, they'll always be misleading. Whether or not this court ruling will force independent testing to industry standards is not clear from available evidence, but that will likely be the only way for any method of ranking to satisfy the ruling and ensure they truly represent accurate real-world usage. Disappointingly, the European Court of Justice, the EU's highest court which sent this trial back to the EU General Court, ruled against Dyson's recent attempt to ensure the test conditions behind the labels are presented. That court claimed the omission of test conditions was not misleading to consumers because additional label information about them does not affect the product energy rating and thus couldn't be included by law. This is contentious given that more than energy usage is listed on the labels, such as cleaning performance, that are affected by the test conditions. However, the annulment of those original labels and the need to reissue to ensure real-world performance is presented may render that verdict obsolete. Only time will tell. Interestingly, manufacturers can choose to continue using the existing old labels if they want, but they must then comply with advertising laws. If a manufacturer is found to make a claim that's not true, for example like Shark's debacle recently, discussed in detail in the 6th link in the description, then they can be sued, so it's very risky to do so. Dyson spent 5 years and a very large sum of money battling against the faulty EU Commission legislation driving the broken aspects of the performance labels. Their success is all the more impressive when you realise that the odds were severely stacked against them, showing just how strong the core principles of their case were to have finally garnered victory. What's sad about this is that most companies just couldn't afford to commit to this size of battle and thus couldn't afford real justice. And in the end, it's all of us that are going to benefit from it now, so we have a lot to thank Dyson for, regardless of whether or not you have any of their products. Dyson have successfully exposed a lot of questionable things behind how the labels got like that in the first place. Much of this is provided in description links 8 onwards for further reading. The court ruled Dyson were discriminated against in favour of bagged cleaners, and it was revealed in the news articles that the predominantly German manufacturers of those bagged cleaners had actually lobbied the senior EU Commission officials that made the legislation behind the labels. Dyson seemed to be effectively accusing the bureaucrats themselves of endorsing legislation that Dyson deemed illegal and fundamentally anti-competitive, as the court effectively agreed. It's this seemingly shady behaviour at high levels of political legislating that may have driven James Dyson's personal disliking of the EU, and to completely U-turn from originally pushing for a single currency a few years ago to getting the UK out of the EU. This court case has exposed lack of respectability for bagged vacuum technology and their manufacturers. This has important implications for how to view supporters or advocates of such technology over Dyson's measurably superior cyclonic counterpart. The virtues of Dyson cyclones over bagged technology is covered in detail in the 7th link in the description and well worth a watch. This case has also shown how disgraceful and inferior the courts can be. That the EU General Court rejected Dyson's case so frivolously to the extent that they were chastised by the highest court in the land, and then later concluded the exact opposite of their earlier poor judgment, is a complete disgrace, and Dyson are right to be angry about things. Dyson were unfairly forced into a much longer and highly costly battle due to that questionable judgment, and that puts us consumers at risk of being denied justice. The court originally seemed to overlook key principles of intention, namely the labelling system, as long as it fitted within the letter of the law. That's not a sign of a healthy justice system. There's little comfort from knowing that the right decision was only made after an expensive and drawn-out battle at the top of society because Dyson could afford it. The response from Siemens and Bosch has been simply that they'll thoroughly analyse the decision and what this will mean for manufacturers of vacuum cleaners. What it means is that they can't hide behind that loophole now, and will have to tell the full truth.